Hi everybody, it's Cray, and I teach watercolor, and today we are doing our North Pacific Coast project.
Ooh, wow.
Oh, we have Michael here working the cameras,
Well, hi.
and we are going to be doing this project in 6 steps. So our very first step is we are going to put in our sky and this kind of like background land area. Our second step is we are going to paint in the water, our first layer of water and sand. Our third step is we are going to put in our rocky edge as well as some shadows on the water. Our fourth step is we are going to do another layer of shadows on our water and our sand. And we'll put in the foreground foliage and path. Our fifth step is we're going to splatter for some wildflowers. And then our sixth step is just checking everything and doing any finishing details. Okay?
Sounds great.
Now I will say this is a project that takes a little bit of patience. So it's going to be a little bit longer, but I always feel like when it comes to whether harder or easier projects, the biggest difference is patience and time. Harder projects use the same exact techniques that we use in beginner projects where we talk about value, we do wet on wet, we add texture, all of those things. It's just more layers and it just takes a little bit longer. So I'm asking you to be patient with yourselves as you paint this. We are using 4 paintbrushes in this project. We have a round 2, round 6, round 12, and 1-inch wash, but please use whatever you have. And I am using some paints from Art Philosophy where I curated these colors especially for this Along the Coast box. And the colors are Sassfrass, Jellyfish, Shadow, Sourwood, Crabapple, and White Mocha.
Again, great names.
So funny. I always thought that naming things would be fun. And then I came up with the colors for our dandelion paint company. And it's not as fun because it's kind of stressful. And then people ask you questions like, why did you name it that color? It's actually not that color. And you're like, oh, this is embarrassing. I'm not sure.
Well, here's the thing. Like, with the dandelion paints, you tried to keep the name of the color in it, like Tahoe blue. You didn't just call it Tahoe. These are fun, but like, if you didn't have a picture, you would have no idea what crabapple, what color that was.
Yes, that's true. Okay, we are going to do our oath and then we will get into painting. So if you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
Promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
Promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
Promise to have fun.
And I love to start that way because this is no stress. We're just here hanging out with friends, painting, having a good time, spending an hour or two just for your creativity. That's the whole point. Okay?
Wait, are we finally friends?
I mean, me and you.
You said hanging out with friends, and I'm the only person here.
I'm hanging out with friends.
Oh, that. Okay, all right. I'll keep working at it.
Yeah, one day.
Okay.
We're married. Okay, so I'm going to start by doing my sky in the background. So just as a reminder, when you guys use cake watercolors, which is what these are, I like to reactivate them using a little spritz of water on each. And then I'm also going to actually wipe a section out so I have a clean area for mixing. You can also use, like if you have your butcher tray palette handy, you can totally mix in that if you want, if this space is not big enough. Because the beautiful thing about a butcher tray palette is you have like so much room to mix. And so sometimes when you have to like go to this little space, it's
so much room for activities.
So much room for mixing activities. Okay, so I'm going to prep my colors. I want my sky, I'm going to grab a little bit of this shadow color, a little bit of this blue, and also a little bit of this white mocha. It's going to create like a really lovely foggy color, which is what I'm going for. If you guys have ever been along the North Pacific coast, it is overcast and rainy and moody and dreary on like rocky seashores and wildflowers all around. It's one of my favorite places. Okay, and let's grab a little bit of color for our land. It's going to be a very similar, but just a little bit more blue, and I'm going to do some white mocha in there to lighten up that value. You can also use water if you want. Okay, I feel good about those colors, and we're just gonna go for it. So I'm gonna take my 1-inch wash. I'm gonna use clean water. I'm gonna make sure that the edges of my tape are all like pushed down. And I'm just gonna wet the sky portion using water. And if you want, you can still use your 1-inch wash, or you can move to your 12, whatever you want. I'm just gonna do these big swoops, kind of following my outline. When it gets closer to the horizon, they're gonna get a little bit thinner. So basically I'm just doing a swoop motion, and then the brush strokes get tighter and thinner as I work my way down. Again, we're really just putting in a gray sky. You can even do an even wash if you want. Like, this is loose. Nothing too crazy here. And remember, watercolors always lighten as they dry. So if you want the sky to be really like gray dark, put in a little bit more color than you would do naturally, or like, I don't know if naturally is the right word, but go a little bit darker for it to really show up. If you want a barely there color, then we're good to go. Okay, that's good. And I'm gonna take my heated craft tool and dry it, because I wanna put in my landscape in the background, but I don't want it to bleed into my sky. So I wanna make sure my sky is dry before I put that in. It's also important to move your heated craft tool along your paper. You don't want to like...
I never hear you call it anything else you use by name. Are they paying you? Heated craft tool?
Oh my gosh, I wish.
Everything you're like, this is just a brush I found in the dirt.
This is a random brush, but this is a heated craft
Heated
tool.
TM.
Make sure you get it from Ranger. No, Ranger's not paying me for that. That would be cool though.
Listen.
Ranger.
Heated craft tool, buy us a boat. I'm just kidding, I don't want a boat. I heard a fun quote that the best boat is your friend's boat.
That is so true. The best boat is your friend's boat. Okay, that feels good. And now you can use your 6 or 2 or 12, whatever brush that you have.
Pick a number.
Pick a number. And we're gonna put in the faraway landscape. Now, I just wanna go through the different areas here with you guys, because there's a lot of lines going on in this paper. It's easy to get lost. So just to be clear, this line right here is our horizon line. That's where our water meets the sky. This section above it is like some faraway land mass, okay, that we'll put in. I am gonna just paint over this area, which is our rocky ledge here. So I'm just going to continue that, and then this goes into our water here. So there are a lot of lines going on here. If you get a little bit lost, it's okay. I want to keep this value fairly light, because that's how we're going to communicate that it's far away. So you can add water or add this white mocha color. Sometimes I like adding the white mocha color because it creates a lighter, grayer value. Without having like to worry about water control, because water control is a little bit tricky to learn. And you see I'm just painting directly into the foliage, and I'm not worried about that because this foliage is actually going to be like black, like a really dark color. So again, just like a light, medium light value right there. Okay, that's it. And I actually like it when it's like a subtle edge, so I'm actually gonna soften that line into there. Okay, that feels good. We're gonna let that dry, and then we're gonna move on to step 2, where we are gonna put in our water and our sand. So again, there's a lot of lines going on here, so I just wanna call attention to this section. You see how it's kind of like double-sided? This is going to be the white of the wave. So I'm going to paint on the right hand side and the left hand side, and try and leave this white section white and not paint it. This is our water edge, and then we move into the sand. Now, I want you to pay attention to, when you look at sand and you look at the water, the tide comes in at different times. And the tide will leave marks where it's been there for a while. So that's why we have so many different marks. And usually the line of where the tide will go in on the sand is a darker value. So that's why we have so many lines in our sand. I know our mind, when we think of sand, we're like, sand, just one thing. But if you actually watch that water along that beach shore or something like that, it always has multiple lines where the tide has come in. I'm using the correct verbiage, right?
I mean, I'm no oceanographer.
Okay, great. All right, so you can use your round 12, your round 6. Just remember, we do have to get this spot back here, and then we'll move forward. So,
Do they make odd numbered brushes? Can you get around 5? I feel like you would have run into it at this point.
I am questioning everything now
Okay.
because I'm not sure.
2, 4, 6, 8, 12 are the ones I'm aware of, you know?
There's a 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12.
There you go. Listen, let's get into the brush market and make odd numbered brushes.
And we'll be called odd brushes.
I love it. There it is. You're in charge of naming, obviously.
Thank you. I'm really, really good at it. Look at our pink color
Tahoe
names.
brush.
Odd 5 brush.
Odd 5.
Use whatever you have brush. Okay, so I still have some blue on my palette. And you can add to that. Actually, I'm just going to paint over this gray section here. So I'm going to be grabbing just straight blue. And let's grab just a tiny bit of this white. And then sometimes water leans a little bit green. Sometimes it leans a little bit purpley or straight blue or gray or brown. But I don't want to paint brown water. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the red in there. Do I like that? And this is like, this is just how I mix. I'm like, let's try this. Do I like that? No? Okay, let's keep going. Or let's try something new.
I think in general, the more nutrient rich water is, the like uglier it becomes. That like super clear water off the coast or wherever, it's because there's like no nutrients in that water and
Oh,
like
really?
no little microorganisms in the water that eat the nutrients.
Really?
Yeah, when you get into like the really gross brown, it's because
Yes.
it's got tons of algae and there's tons of
There's
life.
a lot of life.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So don't be like, ew, that's dirty. Just be like, that is thriving.
Well, or poop water could be brown, so maybe that's what.
Oh, gross.
There's two types.
Okay, so I'm taking this blue and I'm putting it right underneath the rock using horizontal brush strokes. And then I'm going to use water and then just spread that color to my edge here. And we're going to be blending out the value that we laid down, and that's okay, because we'll go back and add more layers to it. And then I'm just taking this color and kind of moving it up. I want the lightest value to be up here near my horizon line. And then same thing, I'm going to paint this section. I'm going to start with the darkest value at the top. And then just use water to spread it out. Okay, so we put in our water. Again, it's just like a lighter wash, just blue. We're just starting to lay that initial color down. Now we're going to move into our sand. And I love painting sand because it could be so many different colors. And so I'm going to grab this Crabapple peach color. And I'm just going to, there's already some like pink on my palette. I'm just going to mix that in there. Why not? And let's grab a little bit of yellow to warm it up. And that might be too orange and saturated. I want this sand to feel kind of gray. So I'm going to grab some shadow.
That color's pretty great.
It is pretty great. And then you can grab some of this white and put that in there too. The white and the peach are actually really lovely colors to have to make sand. There we go. Okay, I feel good. So I'm going for like a tan kind of color, but just know that depending on the beach, and I'm sure the minerals and science things, they change colors. Okay, so I'm going to start with kind of just taking this color and laying it down. Now you'll notice that the lines of the waves kind of match. You see how it sticks out, sticks out, sticks out, goes back in, goes back in. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So just try and make your, whenever you're painting your own things, kind of check that and make sure that your wave lines are like have a similar movement to them. And the same thing, you know how we've talked about like in grass, there's different greens, there's different whatevers. The same is true in sand. There are some sand areas where you can tell that somebody was playing and so the sand is darker, all of that kind of stuff. So it doesn't have to be a perfectly smooth, even wash. And then along the edge, if you can control it, and by control it, if it's not too like wet, you can take a little bit of a darker value here and just kind of like see what would happen if you put that along this edge. And then maybe here too. Now my paper was pretty dry, so it's not moving a ton. So I'm just gonna do an extra little swoop to help it move around a little bit. Come on, little fella, move around for me. And there are rocks along here, so just kind of like you can paint around them or just paint over them because they're gonna be like almost black. And then we're gonna do one more section over here. And I have found that sometimes we'll get some blooms in our sand when we like add an extra layer here or there, and that actually adds to our painting because the blooms can actually act as like a sand, like water edge, you know, a line. Like that is happening right there. And I'm gonna leave that because I just think that that can add to the texture of our sandy beach. Okay. That was step 2. Now we're going to move on to step 3. We're going to do our rocky edge here, and then we'll put in some more shadows on our water, okay? And I just want to call attention to how much our water has lightened up as it has dried. So we'll be doing multiple layers to kind of give it some of that depth. I'm just going to use my Heated Craft Tool by Ranger to make sure that everything is dry before I move on. Now for this rocky edge here, the rock part itself is going to be like a brownish color, and then the top part, like where there's foliage and trees, it's going to be pretty dark, okay? You can see here that there are some lines from the outline. That was me showing you what angle you should do your brush strokes, okay? I'm going to use a lot of dry brush technique as well. For that like delicious texture and unevenness that you would see on a rocky edge. So let's mix a dark brown. How you mix browns is usually by mixing complementary colors. Complementary colors are what are across from each other on the color wheel. Also, brown is essentially dark orange. So if you mix orange and then add black to it, you're going to get brown every time. So let's do that. Red, yellow, more yellow. And let's add the shadow color to it. Voila, brown. And then browns can have, like every color has undertones to it pretty much. So sometimes browns can lean red, lean green, lean gray. So like think about what you want your undertones to be and you can add a little bit of that color if you want. Sometimes I won't know until I start painting and then I'm like, oh, this is leaning this way. Okay, so I picked up that paint and just using my 6, I'm putting color in along the bottom here and then kind of moving my brush upward at an angle. So I don't want my brush to be very wet or smooth. I want this really uneven mark.
I feel like I know how to drive to this exact spot.
Yes.
This is a real spot. This is a hybrid of 2 spots. Is it?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Or is this one spot? Is this a real place?
Oh my gosh, yes, I forgot to talk about that. This, sorry. This place, I actually put together a few photographs that Michael took while we went out there for like Mendocino area, actually. So we can, I don't know if it'd be fun, we can put the photos up on the screen right here.
Great.
And yeah, I combined a couple of those areas. I loved that trip so much. We went to like Fort Bragg and Mendocino. I'm thinking of that right correctly. That's the right area.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, that's what I use as our reference photos. So we have been to these places, and it is a combination of two photographs. Because I really liked the foliage pathway, and then I really liked this rocky, like beachy scene. So I put them together.
Look at this photograph. Every time.
That was good.
Thank you.
Okay, now this section right here, I'm trying to create the illusion that the rock comes out and then it kind of goes back in. So this is darker and then it's going to come out again. So you see how it's not just flat, it goes boo, boo, boo. So this is darker here than what will be on either side of it. And if you can't get a nice rough texture, just hit your brush on your paper towel and it will soak up that excess water or paint. So then it can get this shape here. But I do always try and make sure that the bottom is a dark value. So I'll usually fill that in and then just kind of like make some wonky brush strokes. Now, one thing that we might want to do when we did our rough brush texture, we have like some white spots, right? Which a little bit of white spots is fine, but whenever there is a white spot, that is the whitest you can go on a paper, right? So it's automatically is gonna like pop forward. So sometimes you have to like cover. I picked up some of the sand color and I'm just kind of like putting that over some of these white spots, still using kind of that dry brush technique because it's just going to push that back into space where it goes. So if you're painting something and there's one spot that just keeps like popping out, pulling forward, check your values. Okay. And then on top of this rocky ledge, there's like a really dark green. So I'm going to mix together some blue and yellow. And I want this, and this is where it's going to kind of meet the rocky edge. And some of it can go down a little bit into it if you want, because I feel like that's true to what I would see. And like sometimes the foliage would like bleed down into the rocks and grow through there. Okay. And then I'm going to add black to that green to get just like a very, very dark green. But I don't want to use just black. I still want an undertone of green to it. And then I'm going to put in my foliage on here. And sometimes what I like to do just to get some different textures is I'll take a 1-inch wash and just kind of like tap around the top to get some smaller outcroppings and different textures so it's not a perfectly smooth line. You can also use a foliage brush if you have a smaller brush, but I actually kind of like the wispiness of a 1-inch. And whenever you're looking at this, if you're looking at your rocky edge and you're like, okay, that does feel like a rocky edge, but it just feels too gray or something like that, you can always do an added layer of color, Like, let's do one of like maybe a little bit more orange. So I just want to show you that you always have the opportunity to kind of add a richness to it. Running out of mixing room. There we go. And I just want to show you how sometimes adding a little bit of another color on top can like really make it vibrant and pop. You can do yellows, you can do greens, you can do oranges or reds, really anything. There, that feels like rich to me. Okay, that feels better. And then if you want to like darken some areas too, think about how rocks have like an unevenness to them. Some even like I talked about the whole outcropping, how it does this, but even within rocks, it does this. So we can put in those different values. Okay, ooh, that feels good. All right. Now what we are going to do is we are going to do some water shadows. So we got to look at our water, and not only do the rocks themselves cast shadows, but the values change within the water. You'll notice how there's a little bit of a darker value here, out to here. So I'm going to mix, I'm going to grab some blue. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it. Okay. And just using my 6, I'm going to put that color in and then kind of dry off my brush and just kind of work that color back and forth underneath it. So basically we want to make sure that there is a shadow right underneath this rocky edge. Same thing over here. Put that darker value in. Hit your brush on your paper towel so it dries out and lifts up some of that extra color. Puts in that shadow. Now on this right hand side for these rocks, even though I haven't put in the rocks yet, I'm going to put in a little bit of the shadow. I'm going to wet my brush to lighten that value and then just kind of move this color out. Now we can't forget this back part too, because now we have this delicious texture here and this feels flat. So I just am going to lightly continue this color into the back, thinning out my brush strokes. Okay. Isn't that funny how all of a sudden that feels just a little bit more
lush?
Lush.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of popped a bit more.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then along here, right underneath this kind of wave coming in, I'm going to put some shadow and texture along the bottom. So I'm going to go along the right hand or the line. Let's wet my brush because it got a little too dry. And you can overlap your foliage a bit.
It's incredible that this is your first time painting. You're doing so well.
Yep, first time ever painting.
I'm glad we're capturing it on camera.
How lucky that I can teach it. Okay. And then sometimes I'll go into this, not sometimes, I'm going to go into this white section here and just do a little bit of dry brush into this white line because I don't want it to feel blocky. Think about how you can still see, even when things are kind of splashing up, the hint of the water in between or something like that. Okay. And we'll come back to this too a couple of times to make sure, because of course, as this dries, it's gonna kind of shift. Now, one thing I want to call attention to right now is I'm noticing that my background landscape area is the same exact value as like the water. Like it feels kind of really flat. So I'm going to darken it slightly just to kind of separate that space a bit, but I definitely do not want it as dark as here. So I'm just going to go like one click darker. Like that. There you go. So now we're going to move on to step 4, and we're going to look at our sand again and kind of like tighten that up, and we'll put our smaller rocks in, and then we'll put in our foliage. So let's actually do our rocks first. So I'm going to use that same brown that I've already mixed for my ledge here, and just kind of start to put in that color. And these areas are kind of small, so if you can get that dry brush technique in there, great. If not, don't worry about it too much. And if you need to make your rocks a little bit bigger so they cover up the white like area that you've avoided, you can totally change the size of your rocks. And sometimes what I'll do is, like, while it's wet like this, I'll drop in just like a darker value just to give it a little bit of value shift for dimension. It doesn't have to be like crazy, just a little bit. And then I'm going to take some yellow, just straight yellow, and kind of go over some of the rocky areas just for that little hint of like saturation. But remember, these are pretty tiny. They're not the main thing, so don't stress too much about them.
In real life, they're huge.
Yes, in real life they are huge. I'm just kind of making sure that the bottom is straight, the ones that are coming out of the water.
It's a hard thing in photography and painting is conveying scale.
Yeah.
Like this is a huge area, and like just for me taking pictures of anything, you can never really make it feel that big.
Yeah. I think that's why we try and do like the little tricks to show vastness and sometimes exaggerate some things to really communicate it. So if I'm trying to show like a very vast sky, I'll have very like angled clouds coming in and that kind of thing, because even though that's probably not necessarily true, it's giving that kind of illusion that I'm looking for of vastness. Okay, so now I'm going to take my 6 or my 2, whatever you want. And I still have some of this sandy color here mixed. If not, you can mix the color again. And if it's a slightly different color, it's really not a big deal. And I'm going to go along this little edge here and kind of put in that darker value. And then I'm going to dry off my brush and just kind of smear it out. That probably was too much. If it's ever too much, you can always take a damp brush and blend. Now, the other thing to think about is if you look at rocks and a water coming in and out, the sand area underneath the rock is always less. There's always a darker value right underneath there. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a shadow right here, thinking about how that water takes a little bit more of that sand. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you visualize it?
Yep.
And this is where if you want to like add little fun things like tiny little footprints or something like that, you can. Seaweed. That's another popular thing you would find. Okay, that feels pretty darn good. And now I'm going to put in my path and my foliage. So, excuse me, you want to make sure when you do this, I want you to notice I want you to notice something. I don't know if it's three. On this foliage here, the bottom of this needs to be a dark value. That's how we're showing that it's more like the side of something, that it's coming out of the ground. This, it doesn't matter as much because we're really just seeing the top of it. We're not seeing where it meets the ground. So we have a pathway coming here and this foliage is sticking up out of it. So we're just seeing the top, but on this, we see the side of it. We see that foliage come up here. So the foliage up here is going to be a light value. This is going to be a dark, and then this will be mostly light. Okay. I'm going to use a paper towel to pick up some of the colors to get an inconsistent value line within there because I want it to feel wild. And let's put in our path first. So I'm going to use brown, but I want it to be a different brown than the rocks. So I'm going to mix more yellow into my brown, maybe a little bit more of the red. So I'm just going to start with the dark brown around 12. And I always like to put in my line first and then just kind of use water to spread that out, just like that. Okay, now we're gonna mix a dark or a green. So I already have some green going over here. So I'm just gonna add to that. Throw in some yellow and some more blue. And you can decide, do you want your green to be really yellow green? Do you want it to be more blue green? Do you want it to be desaturated? Okay. And then using my 12, I'm going to just put this color in along the bottom here. Now it's going to meet that brown and kind of blend and bleed, but that's okay. Now I'm going to rinse my brush and just kind of smear. Rinse it one more time. So then the top is just barely there green. And then while it's wet like this, I love to just like boop, 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 put in different values. Just like that. And if you want to do one extra little swoop of dark green along the bottom, that's what I'm going to do. Okay.
Looks like a teeny tiny forest.
It does look like a teeny
Like
tiny
if you
forest.
just chunked off the corner.
It's a baby forest. Okay, and same thing on this right hand side, but I'm going to add water to my green that I have mixed already because I want it to stay in this kind of value. And actually, while this is wet, I can take my paper towel and just kind of boop, dot, dot, dot. Okay, and so same thing. That's a little too blue. See how blue that green is? I'm going to add some yellow in there. That feels better. And I'm just kind of doing do, 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 do. So it's a very loose, uneven wash, and I want to make sure that I'm going into the water, into the sand. I do not want any white spaces in between. So if you see a white chunk, you need to cover that up where it meets the sand in the water. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to drop in. See, that might be too dark, but let's just let it play out. Let's just see what happens because watercolor does lighten. If you have like a sponge, that could be a cool thing to use for this texture. The only thing about sponges that sometimes frustrate me is if you use the same section over and over again, then it's the same repeated mark over and over again, which sometimes can distract our brain. So when I use sponges, I'll use a side and then I try and turn it. So then it's not the same kind of mark making pattern. Same with like my paper towel. Like sometimes I'll do it light on one thing or hard on another just to kind of mix up my mark making. Okay, now this, we gotta have it go into the path. Okay. And I'm just kind of messing up the line of where that dark value met the light value. It was a pretty jagged, like, or not jagged, but straight line. And I just want to make it a little bit more uneven. Okay. So we put in our foreground path, our foliage, we darkened our sand, and I'm going to look at my water another time and I'm like, okay, this is looking good, but I think I can even bring that shadow in more. I think I can darken it and bring it in again. So I still have that blue. I'm going to do another swoop, dry off my brush, bring that shadow out. Same thing, I really want to make sure that my water around my rocks is dark. And now that I have my rocks put in, if I need to cover up some white areas, I can. And I feel like I can do one more swoop out here. Really embrace the dry brush technique, the unevenness, because these waters are not smooth like glass. They are uneven. There are some waves. There's movement, all of that kind of stuff. So let the dry brush technique really do a lot of that work for you. There we go. That feels good. I think I can even go just one click darker right at that. Like right underneath. Ooh, that might be too dark. Let's lighten that up.
My family goes up here every year. Like when I was a kid, we went here every year. And I have this fun memory. Every year, my dad was just so excited to go. And he would spend the entire week trying to catch crabs in his like homemade crab catching invention. And like he would get one or two and just thought he was the king. He would just cook up his one or two little crabs.
That's so
It
great.
was just so fun.
You know, as I'm a parent and the older I get and all of this stuff, I realize that making memories like that for your kids is just so important. And like being consistent in your traditions is what makes them traditions
Yeah.
and what your kids will look back on fondly. And so like, and the other part of it is just like how magical your childhood is directly related to how hard your parents work.
Yeah.
You know what I
To
mean?
make it magical.
And it's hard because we have these ridiculous things on Pinterest that are telling us we need to do all of the magical things and plant this and elf on the shelf that and all this stuff. Which, if you want to do that, I love that. But for me, I'm just like, okay, that is cool, but I want them to remember the homemade crab traps that we try and catch crab with every year. And I want them to remember us sitting on the porch and watching the fireflies. I don't want them to remember that the elf on the shelf cut off their Barbie's head. You know what I mean? Like,
They do that?
yes,
Those elves are violent?
for like older kids, I think
Okay.
they do the more.
Yeah, I don't know. I just loved like it wasn't even that he was successful at catching the crabs. It was just fun watching. He was just like a big kid, just excited out there.
But I do want to clarify that like if you think that that is fun, I'm so happy that you do it. I don't want to like poo poo. I don't want to yuck somebody's yum. You know what I mean? If you love Elf on the Shelf, then like so amazing and that's so good and your kids will love that. but also I have been starting to give myself grace of being like, I don't have to do all of that.
Our
And I
problem is we forget to move the elf. And the kid, and then like the kids are like, "Wait, what happened? Were
I
we
know.
bad?" And I'm
I
like,
know.
"Oh, jeez."
It's created a lot of
I'm like,
problems.
"No, you're not bad.
You're not, you're great. I'm
I
sorry.
forgot."
Okay. So this is actually feeling really, really good. And now I'm on step 5 where I'm going to start splattering in some of the wildflowers, which if I remember correctly, when we went to some of these places, there was like pinks and purples and whites and oranges. Like there was flowers everywhere, just like ground covering flowers. And so mask off or cover your beach area and then pick up, I'm going to start with this peachy color. If you want to make it more pink, you can by putting a tiny bit of red in there. And I'm going to use my sticks. And we're doing this on top of green foliage, so of course it's not going to be super vibrant. Now I'm going to grab yellow.
I feel like you're like telling me something in Morse code.
And I'm going to grab some red. Just a little though. Okay. And we got to do the same thing over on this side. So I'm just changing the angle of my paper. Do this peachy color. Now this, it's gonna stay mainly at the top because remember we have the sides here, but like short flowers stick out of the side too. So you can have some.
I love this place also, and you can't really tell from this picture, but if you turn around and look the other direction, it's the redwood forest.
Yes.
So like you spend days at the beach with all this like literally, in my opinion, the most gorgeous beach on the planet. And then like when you're bored of that, you have the entire redwood
Yes.
forest to I don't know.
It's beautiful.
It's magic.
It's one of my favorite places. It's one of those places that like you go to and you're like, my soul is at home here. And I feel like that's different for so many people, and it's so interesting to hear what people like connect with. But for this place specifically, Fort Bragg, Mendocino, when we visited and stayed there for about a week, I just was like, I know that what my soul is made of and what this place is made of is the same.
If you're a llama and you happen to have a house you're just wanting to give away, and it's in this area, please let
Just
us.
give me a mine.
I'll just take that from you.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go in and do the finishing details on my foliage. Now, I've lost a little bit of like my medium greens, and so you can always like go back in. I'm using my round 2 and just kind of put some in here and there, blend them out. And if you're like, but Sarah, I already did my wildflowers, that's okay. They can blend and bleed too. This is messiness. This is uneven. This is just wild coverage. The biggest thing is we just don't want this to get darker than this. So if you need to kind of darken this edge up a little bit more to keep those values in check, then go ahead and do that. And we can put more medium values up here too. And you can do like thin pieces of grass sticking out here and there. So just kind of keep going around. Adding little lines, adding things poking out, messing up that kind of really smooth line. That was a little bit thick. Oh well. Here we go, nice and thin. But remember, your brain is going to want to make the same marks over and over again. So try and like keep your lines inconsistent in angle and spacing and length. And you can have the lines coming out within your like foliage too. It doesn't just have to be the perimeter. Okay. That feels nice and wild.
Beautiful.
And then looking at your path, if you want to do a couple like just horizontal brush strokes and activate it. If it looked a little too flat, you can do that. Okay, and the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check my horizon line next to my sky, because we put our sky in, but that was without putting in any water. And so if you're just like, oh, I really like how that's going, that looks good, then you're good to go. For me, I think I'm going to do a couple darker strokes to show that the sky keeps on going, and to add a little bit of that depth so it doesn't feel like even in value and flat. So I'm going to grab some blue and shadow and white.
This would be a cool and ambitious night starry scene with reflections on the water.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And I'm just kind of following the swoops and letting them get thinner. Just like that. But I'm going to do one more right above. Now it's not going to be like our first layer made it very smooth and soft looking. When you add paint like this in there, it is not going to like look that beautiful diffuse color, but that's okay. So you see how just that kind of little bit of darker just kind of pushes it back just a tiny bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. And then I'm going to look at my water behind here. Now, even though I very much put blue in, next to the dark value of this rock, it now looks white. So I'm just going to take a very light blue . I touched the green so it kind of bled a little bit, but that's okay. I just don't want that area to be white. I don't want it to pop forward. I need to push it back, so I gave it a little bit of a darker value. And I think we're there. That feels good.
It's beautiful.
There is our North Pacific Coast project.
Makes me nostalgic.
I know. I had the best time. I'm going to remove the tape so we can see the gorgeous edge. So satisfying removing that tape and seeing it.
Maybe Ranger Craft Tool will buy us a house. What is it called?
Heated craft tool.
Ranger? I didn't know that was the brand until today.
Yep.
Beautiful.
There we go. Okay. I hope you guys can see that with some patience, you can get a full out ocean painting. And remember that you can always start light and add the values on top to build that form and to build that depth and to make it pop. And I hope that by mixing all of these colors and doing all these textures and all this stuff, you can recognize that we celebrate the differences. And you can paint the same painting so many times. I mean, I've painted this one and I painted this one and they look different, and that is okay. We don't want the expectation that you have to do carbon copies in order for it to be good or valuable or any of that stuff. I think that's all I got to say. If you need any of these supplies, you can find them at letsmakeart.com. If you're on the Facebook group, you can join that. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. If you're on Instagram, tag us. We want to see your work. That is Let's Go Make Art. And Michael, thank you for being here. Always a pleasure.
You're very welcome.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.